புரம் இலக்கிய விருதின் நிகழ்வுகளில் இன்றைய மதிய அமர்வு ஒரு சிறப்பு வாய்ந்த அமர்வு. நமக்கு வரலாற்று ரீதியாக பொதுவாகவே நமது வாசிப்பின் வழியே வரும்போது இந்திய சுதந்திரத்தோடு நமது வரலாற்று வாசிப்பு ஒரு ஒரு தேக்க நிலையை அடைகிறது. அந்த இடத்தை உடைத்து அதற்கு பிறகு இந்தியாவினுடைய நவீன இந்தியா உருவாகி வந்த வரலாற்றை நமக்கு எழுதி நமது தளத்தில் முக்கியமாக கொண்டு வந்து சேர்த்ததில் திரு ராமச்சந்திர குஹா அவர்களின் பங்கு மிக முக்கியமானது. அந்த ஒரு புத்தகத்தின் வழியாகவே இந்தியாவினுடைய நவீன இலக்கிய வரலாறை நாம் புரிந்து கொள்ளக்கூடிய ஒரு முழுமையான குறுக்குவெட்டு சித்திரத்தை கொடுத்தவர். அதை தொடர்ந்து அவருடைய காந்தியை குறித்த நூல்கள் ஆகியவை நமது தளத்தில் பலமுறை நாம் பேசி பகிர்ந்தவை. இன்று நமது விழாவினுடைய சிறப்பு விருந்தினராக வந்திருக்கிறார். அவருடனான அரங்கு திரு ராமச்சந்திர குஹா அவர்களை மேடைக்கு அழைக்கிறோம். Sir, may we have you on the stage, sir? நமது நண்பரும் சாகித்ய அகாடமி விருது யுவ புரஸ்கார் விருது பெற்றவருமான சுனில் கிருஷ்ணன் அவர்களை கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறோம். சிறப்பு விருந்தினராக வருகை தந்த ராமச்சந்திர குஹா அவர்களுக்கு நன்றி. அவரை கௌரவிக்கும் விதமாக நமது நண்பர்கள் சார்பில் இன்றைய விழா நாயகனான யுவன் சந்திரசேகர் அவர்களை அவருக்கு பொன்னாடை போர்த்தி நினைவு பரிசு வழங்குமாறு கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறோம்.
Good afternoon, friends. It is indeed strange and wonderful to have a historian who locates interesting stories in the history as a guest of honor on the occasion of award ceremony of a fiction writer who reads all history as some interesting story. ஸோ அதாவது ஒரு வரலாற்றிலிருந்து சுவாரஸ்யமான கதைகளை எடுக்கக்கூடிய ஒரு வரலாற்று ஆசிரியர் வரலாற்றையே கதையாக பார்க்கக்கூடிய ஒரு புனை எழுத்தாளருடைய விருது விழாக்கு வர்றதுங்கிறது ஒரு சுவாரஸ்யமான முரண். நமக்கு எல்லாரும் ராமச்சந்திர குஹாவை பற்றி நம்ம அறிமுகப்படுத்திக்க வேண்டியதில்லை. அவர் ஒரு என்விரான்மெண்டலிஸ்ட், ஹீஸ் எ ஸ்போர்ட்ஸ் ரைட்டர் ஆஸ் வெல். ஹீ ரைட்ஸ் அபவுட் கிரிக்கெட் இன் த சோஷியல் ஹிஸ்ட்ரி, அது கிரிக்கெட்டினுடைய சமூக வரலாறுலேருந்து எழுதக்கூடியவர். அண்ட் இந்தியன் ஹிஸ்ட்ரி, கலோனியல் ஹிஸ்ட்ரி, குறிப்பாக காந்தி பற்றி அவர் எழுதின நூல்கள் அது மிக முக்கியமாக பேசப்படக்கூடிய ஒரு நூல்கள். இந்திய அளவுலையும் உலக அளவுலையும் மிக முக்கியமான ஒரு அறிஞராக குஹா என்று கருதப்படுகிறார். என்று நமது அரங்கிற்கு அவர் வந்திருக்கக்கூடியது ஒரு பெரிய நமக்கு கிடைத்த ஒரு பெரிய மகிழ்ச்சி. இட்ஸ் அன் ஹானர் டு ஹாவ் யூ ஹியர் as part of the discourse, sir. So that's what his works range from cricket to environmentalism and Gandhi and Indian history. So to start with, I'll just ask a question. So why is Gandhi a biographer's delight?
Well, Gandhi is both a biographer's delight and also deeply frustrating and exasperating to write about Gandhi, because there are thousands of books written about him. You know, I should say, Sunil, that my book on Gandhi was not my first biography. So I wrote a biography of many years ago of a maverick English radical called Verrier Elwin, who was an Oxford scholar who came to India, joined Gandhi. He was a priest. He left the church, then he went to live among the Adivasis of central India, and he wrote a series of very moving ethnographies about tribal life. And he was essentially a poet who became an anthropologist. So his prose sparkled and had a lightness which usually academic prose does not. And he had a very fascinating life. An Englishman becomes an Indian, a priest who abandons the church, an upper class person who goes to live with Adivasis, who after independence is an advisor to the government of India with regard to Arunachal Pradesh, who writes poetry, fiction, very controversial, a little bit like me, always getting into trouble through his articles and people, debating with him. So I wrote a book on him, which I enjoyed writing. But no one had written a biography of Elvin before. And no one is likely to write a biography of Elvin again. My next biographical project was about a Dalit cricketer called Palwankar Balu, which you alluded to, Sunil. I wrote a book called A Corner of a Foreign Field, which is oriented around a family of four great Dalit cricketers in Bombay at the turn of the century. Now, well before Test cricket, well before Ranji Trophy, let alone IPL, a century before IPL, in 1911, there was an All India Tour of England, the first All India team to tour England. They did not play Test matches, but they played a lot of county matches, and the star was a Dalit bowler called Palwankar Balu, who had faced enormous caste discrimination in Bombay. All of you know the tea interval in cricket. So he could not have tea with his teammates. The teammates would go in the pavilion, he would be given tea in a disposable cup outside. So he really had to struggle, and he was Ambedkar's first hero. In fact, when Balu came back from England in 1911, after having been the great star of that tour, Ambedkar was a brilliant young student in Wilson College. Ambedkar's first public speech was a felicitation for Balu. Now, so there again I wrote a book on Balu, fascinating Dalit cricketer and all the struggles he had to undergo. So it was the first time any historian has paid serious attention to Balu, because we believe, some young people here may believe that cricket started with IPL. Others may believe it started with the 1983 World Cup victory. But actually it began in the 19th century, and his first great cricketers were Dalits. Now, again, I was a pioneer. With Elvin, I was a pioneer. But when it came to Gandhi, there was a whole library of books. So what new was I going to say? Now, I was determined to write about Gandhi, and I found lots of new interesting archival material. And I think I added to the Gandhi literature. But so it was daunting, intimidating to write on Gandhi, but also necessary and important for a historian of modern India, because Gandhi is without doubt the most remarkable, the most important, the most influential, and the most controversial figure in our modern history. So a historian like me had to settle my accounts with him. I could not depart this life on earth without writing on Gandhi. So even if there were 5,000 books on Gandhi, I said I will write the 5,000 first.
Good afternoon, sir. In one of the podcasts that I was listening to of yours, I think it was Amit Verma, Seen and Unseen, you speak about how you don't read much fiction at all. But when I read a work like India After Gandhi, there's a very strong sense of a storyteller who comes through, who mines this depth of information that's there on modern history and gives us a very engaging story. And maybe Sunil was also alluding to that in his introduction. So the two questions: one, how did that come to be? And secondly, do you not read fiction consciously, or is it a matter of taste?
So that's a very good question. I wasn't being entirely honest when I said that, because one of the rules, I read occasionally to read fiction, but when I was younger, I read a lot of fiction. And I think some of my prose comes from reading writers who wrote well when I'm in the English language. I mean, sadly, I am basically not completely monolingual, but I speak English fluently and Hindi adequately and no other language. And I can read, I regrettably don't speak Tamil or any other Indian language. But when I was younger, I read a lot of fiction. And when I think of some of the writers I read, for example, Ernest Hemingway, Somerset Maugham, some of the writers who may now be less known, some of the detective story writers. There was a great American detective story writer called Rex Stout, Raymond Chandler. Now these people wrote a very crisp, precise prose, and that must have seeped into what I was doing. That's the first part of my answer to your question. The second part of my answer to your question is that I've always believed that history is a branch of literature and social science. Not just social science, not just literature. Antiquarian historians just tell a story. Academic historians minutely analyze and present the analysis in really cumbersome, clunky, jargon-ridden, unreadable prose. But you have to have an analytical framework. You have to know some sociology, some politics, some economics, but you must also be able to write engagingly. So I believe history is also a branch of literature. It may be an inferior branch of literature to the best fiction, but a superior branch of literature to the second best fiction. Okay, so thank you for your compliment. I'm not saying I can't write as well as Tolstoy, but I write better than lots of other fiction writers. Okay, now, but the last thing I say,
Okay.
I do read some fiction. Out of choice now, it is not on India, because all my life is India. There are exceptions. You know, during the pandemic, I read Tolstoy, War and Peace, and Anna Karenina. And I also read Middlemarch, three of the greatest novels ever. And I'm happy I read it. If I read fiction that is Indian, I read it in translation, not English language fiction. And again, I read a beautiful novel which I recommend to everyone. And maybe this person should be called to the Vishnupuram Literary Forum if he has not already been called. This is the Hindi writer Gyan Chaturvedi, whose novel Adipura, magnificently translated by Salim Yusufi, is a very sensitively written, unflinching account of casteism and corruption and communalism in a North Indian small town. So, because that's a world I cannot enter. You know, the world of the Indian English writer is my world. So now I've started reading a little fiction. And I make just one last point, since we are in a literary forum. You know, I read a lot of, among the writers who influenced me when I was young was George Orwell, who wrote both fiction and non-fiction, and again, you know, as someone said, his prose was like a window pane, so clear. I think the real deficiency in my literary upbringing is that I have never acquired a taste for poetry. And that's my loss. Why I did not acquire a taste for poetry was that when I was young, I spent too much time playing cricket. And if you come back from cricket practice, you're tired, you can read a novel, you can read a short story. But to read poetry, you need an absolutely clear, fresh, energetic mind. And when I look at my wife, who can recite reams of poetry, you know, I feel that is really my loss, not reading so much fiction, but I wish I had developed a taste for poetry.
Hello, sir. Huge fan of your work. My question is in two parts. The first part is, you've been a chronicler of great lives, more than an academic historian in the strictest sense of the word. To me, you have written biographies of Varya Relvan, Palvankar Balu, Gandhi, or now you have your new collection, Rebels Against the Raj. But this was not a trend in vogue. I say this was not a trend in vogue because we currently have such historians coming up in the Indian scenario. But you were not someone like, say, Sanjay Subramaniam, who would write a systems theory of history. So what drew you to this approach of history over the other side? This is the first part. The second part is, do you feel limited? Do you feel the limitations of the personalities that you take up? Say, when you write about someone like Varya Relvan, do you feel limited by the personality in describing the times in their entirety?
Yeah, so I'd like to take gentle issue with your characterization of my work. One part of my work on biographies. Gandhi was no doubt a great man, but no one had heard about Elvin before I wrote about him. No one had heard of Palvankar Balu before I wrote about him. Even the characters in Rebels in the Raj are really, except for Annie Besant, are relatively little known. So these are intermediate figures, you know. So in that sense, Gandhi is the one exception, even in my biographical writing. Now, the second, I'll answer the other part of your question in a minute. But when you write a biography, there has to be two aspects to it. One is, it has to be, or three aspects. One is that it can't be told simply from your subject's point of view. Every previous life of Gandhi used the 97 volumes of his collected works and told his story. I looked at very different kinds of sources. Letters to Gandhi, letters about Gandhi, intelligence report, newspaper accounts. So it has to be many-sided. It has to be like a play or a film. in which there's a very large cast of characters and they all have their say. Then secondly, you must be absolutely unflinching about the failures of your subject. You may be broadly sympathetic. Why would I spend 10 years on Gandhi unless I generally liked him, but I'm not blind towards him? And thirdly, a biography must be life and times. So it must be sketching also the larger times. Now, where you're a young man, so this is not your fault that you know only my recent books. But how old are you, by the way, if I may ask? Huh? 24. Okay. So my first book was published 10 years before you were born. Okay. And it's a study of peasant movements in the Himalaya. After that, I wrote an ecological history called This Fish and Land. And then a book called Ecology and Equity. So my early works are actually social history from below. Now I may go back to that. As a historian, I've written on cricket, I've written on environment, I've written on different things. But it is true that I am attracted to the portrait of individuals, but not necessarily great people. You know, they could be little known people. If you read my columns, for example, I recently wrote a column about two 95-year-olds who died. Okay. I happen to know them. Both were engineers. Both went to England to study, but both came back. Neither joined the big corporation. Both worked in the government. One joined the railways and electrified the Baroda-Bombay line. The other worked in HAL and helped indigenize our aircraft industry. So here were two public-spirited engineers working to build India who were unknown. But through their life you could tell a larger story. And you could also remind the reader that there were great people doing great things in India before 2014. Right. Okay. So except for Gandhi, I like writing about less known people. Gandhi is the one exception because, as I said, he's so overpowering. But as I said, my early work, I've done social history. And I think even Sanjay, you mentioned Sanjay Subramaniam, but one of his best books is a biography on Vasco da Gama. So I think historians the best historians, like Sanjay Subramaniam, don't like to be typecast in playing the same raga over and over again. They have to have variety.
Okay, thank you. So, I just want to ask one thing from my side, as you told about. So, you told about the lesser known figures. So, when I read the Gandhi biography, one personality whom I struck is Sheikh Mehta. So I didn't know that the same guy who was referred in his autobiography in the earlier chapters as the one who introduced me, who is considered to be the bad influence, and then he comes back and lives with him in the South Africa. Again he has a bad incident, and then even after that he writes poem for the movement, Indian opinion. So it's a strange thing. I think this is a very fascinating story. So there are even about the Sonia Sleshin. She comes as a very great personality. We didn't know.
My Gandhi biography. Normally, when people write about Gandhi, it's from Gandhi's point of view. There may be Kasturba, there may be Harilal, there may be Nehru, there may be Patel, there may be Sarojini Naidu, and that's about it. But in my editor, Sunny Mehta, who's a great Indian editor who worked in New York, said in your book there are at least 150 interesting characters. And I thought that was a great tribute because all the lesser characters, we live a life in relationship to other characters. They could be our friends, our rivals, our lovers, our associates, and they illuminate our lives. So I think Sonia Sleshin, who was his secretary, remarkable Jewish woman who could argue back with Gandhi, she was unknown. Henry and Millie Pollack. Yes. So I think that is I tried not to write an excessively Gandhi-centered work. So think of it as I said, as a play or as a film with, obviously Gandhi is the main character, but there are many other interesting, unusual people who have dealings with him.
Hello, sir. Sir, I have read about your book, A Corner of a Foreign Field, in which you explain about the triangular, the quadrilateral and pentangular, which is considered to be the predecessor to the current Indian Premier League. And I have also read about one of your column in which you write Gandhi have detested that pentangular tournaments because there is a communal element associated with it, which is helping the Britishers to very conveniently divide and rule India. So my question is, if Gandhi is alive today, what would be Gandhi's view on IPL? Whether Gandhi would have considered IPL is just an Indian profiteers league conducted by Board of Chronic Capitalists in India, or whether Indian Premier League have democratized the Indian sport. For an example, because the cricket, proper cricket, test cricket could be played for 5 days, only the economically privileged people could spare 5 days of their life and they can play cricket. Whereas T20 cricket, despite all the capitalistic demons associated with it, it have democratized people who play, who have a job, they can spare just 4 hours of cricket. So Gandhi would have appreciated it, or Gandhi would have detested it.
Yeah.
It's just...
That's a wonderful question. I cannot answer it on behalf of Gandhi, but I'll answer it on behalf of myself. Now, when IPL started in 2008, I wrote a column where I said, a test match is like single malt whiskey. You savor every sip, you remember everything. You know, a great spell, a great innings, a great catch. Decades later, you can remember what happened, like a fine single malt whiskey. 1-day cricket, 50-50, is like Indian-made foreign liquor. You remember a little bit, maybe one innings, one catch. 20-20 is like hooch, it's like arak. So an addict who can't get the single malt, can't get Indian-made foreign liquor, wants to get drunk, goes to watch IPL. Right. So this argument was made from the point of view of a lover of cricket, from an aesthetic point of view. Right. So again, if you want to use a different analogy, and I'm a follower of Hindustani music, not of Carnatic music, but you will understand it. I think so. You can think of. I'll try to use please correct me if my Carnatic music analogies are wrong. A test match is like what is called Ragam, Tandam, Pallavi, RTP, full raga, what we call khayal in Hindustani. 1-day cricket is like a Thumri or a Javali, right? 20-20 is like a film song, right? So there is a place for everything, right? Having said that, before IPL started, Mukul Keshavan, who is a very good writer on politics and cricket, some of you may read him, he said there should be a South Asian League. Lahore Lions, captained by Virendra Sehwag. Jaffna Tigers, captained by Wasim Akram. Dhaka something else, captained by Sachin Tendulkar. Now, that at least would have brought the region together. So Gandhi would have approved of that. Right. I think if there had been a real good South Asian League, where Indian players could play with Pakistani teams, Pakistani players could play with Bangladesh teams, and now the IPL is only within India. It consolidates the power of the BCCI. Foreign players can play in IPL, but Indian players can't play in West Indies or South Africa. That is totally wrong. So I think the structure of the IPL, Gandhi would have disapproved of. He would have approved of what Mukul Keshavan wanted, a real, a pan-South Asian league with teams everywhere and, kind of a multinational tournament.
So I just wanted to ask one more question, sir. So when I was reading this corner field thing, so the Britishers, they refer cricket as a manly game again and again. I was surprised, like you associate football and rugby with the manly game. So
I think, yeah. I think what they meant was it manly virtues like honor and straightforwardness.
Okay.
Sport.
Okay. Yes.
My name is Mohd. So my question is from India after Gandhi. In the part 2, whenever uncertainty happened, Nehru's death and emergency, the foreign media always predict democracy would die and India would split into pieces. But the prediction always become wrong, right? So again and again. So why it is difficult for foreign media to predict or truth of India always wrong in an inaccurate manner?
I have some sympathy with the foreign media because, as I suggested India after Gandhi, our country is the most reckless political experiment in human history. Never before was such a large and diverse country, a territory constituted as a single nation, and never before was a largely illiterate population run democratically, And the Soviet Union broke up. The Austro-Hungarian Empire broke up. If you look at large multinational countries, they tend to break up. And so they thought Nehru is holding it together. So clearly there was a skepticism that the foundations, and they perhaps didn't understand that the foundations were quite strong. But it's because most countries are run on the basis of a single language, a single religion, and indeed some Indians today want India to be run on the basis of a single language and a single religion. Right. So you can understand where that skepticism was coming from.
Mr. Guha, I have a question. I was at the Bangalore Lit Fest recently where you spoke about personality cults in democracies. So what you said was, in a democracy, how a personality cult develops around an individual, the qualities of an individual that makes a cult develop around him, and the effect it has on various institutions like the press, the judiciary, and the civil services, and so on. One institution you did, it's not an institution, but one segment you did not mention is the intellectual. So the intellectual, I feel that the intellectual had a role in propping up the personality cult. The way we see the intellectual space, it has changed in a way where the personality itself is being propped up by a certain section of the intellectual. And on the other hand, a personality cult is also caving in and changing the landscape of intellectual discourse in India. I would like to ask, what would you recommend is the role of an intellectual in the kind of political climate we have today?
That's a very good question. I'll answer the second part first. I'll come to where you say that the government is trying to manipulate intellectual life. That's very, very clear. For example, if you look at the attacks on JNU, on Delhi University, on our public institutions, I can give some examples from my own experience. I was appointed to a chair in Ahmedabad University to teach on Gandhi. It is the city of Gandhi. The governing body got a call from one of the two most powerful politicians in India. You can guess. Both are Gujarati. Okay. Saying, you cannot recruit this man. IIT Chennai, in your home state, asked me to speak. And they said you can't speak on Nehru. Nehru started the IITs. Right. So you have all of that. Right. And they clearly want to do. But at the same time, you also have, as you say, intellectuals supporting them, promoting them, taking advantage of them. But why are they doing this? Because other intellectuals belonging to other political parties did the same thing when their party was in power. When the Congress was in power, you would have people having their book release with Manmohan Singh. If the DMK is in power here, you will find things. So my view is, the job of an intellectual is, or a writer, not just intellectual, writer, intellectual, artist, filmmaker, anyone in the creative space, is to be completely independent of political parties and politicians. That does not mean you don't have political views in your columns. You may be pro-free market, anti-free market, pro-Hindutva, anti-Hindutva, pro-environmentalism, anti-environmentalism. It does not mean you don't vote. But in your work, in your public life, you must never attach yourself to an individual. So I'll give you, again, and I follow this consistently. I'll give you two examples from, again, if I may, from my recent personal. Rahul Gandhi invited me to join his yatra. He wrote me a very nice letter saying, I know you have been critical, but please come. I wrote him a letter saying, thank you, I appreciate your graciousness, but I don't believe writers should, if I in a frame with you, it means I'm endorsing you. But other anti-Modi intellectuals went. They had their photo taken with Rahul Gandhi. They were happy. Why were they happy? Not because they are corrupt or ambitious. No. Because they have a mistaken view of the intellectual's vocation. They think they will whisper in Rahul Gandhi's ear, if you want to defeat Modi, follow my advice, do this. Right, they have an inflated idea of their advisory role, right. So, even more recently, your chief minister, not your chief minister, Tamil Nadu's chief minister, invited me in the International Book Fair. A senior officer of his called me in inaugural function to be the chief minister in the podium. I said no. At the same time, I am happy to meet any politician one-on-one. Usually in Koshi's Cafe in Bangalore, which is where I am, if they want to meet me, they can come. Right. So I must talk to them because I want to know their ideas. But it is so. The reason intellectuals, right-wing intellectuals today give legitimacy to Modi is wrong. But they were given the opportunity and they're still given the opportunity by progressive, anti-communal intellectuals, hanging around with the Congress and the Communists and the DMK. Writers and intellectuals must be completely independent of parties and politicians. Absolutely.
So, hi Ram, I'm Kannan. I hope I can take the liberty to start my question with a personal mail exchange that we had. In your Anthropologist about Marxists, you had very harsh criticism about Vinoba, and many years later, I had read that and I had written a very rather harsh criticism about your critique of Vinoba, and you discovered that essay or a blog a few years later, and you wrote to me personally explaining your stance on Vinoba, and I thought it was very gracious of you to do that, and I wanted to share that experience with the audience here. I have two questions. One, after having done extensive work on Gandhi, which I think came much afterwards, after your own critique of Vinoba, has your understanding or appreciation of Vinoba changed? That is one. And second, it's in continuation of that, actually many of us here are personally acquainted with Krishnamal Jagannathan. Yes. I think many of us heard about her from the writings of Jeyamohan, and we have all visited her. We are very familiar with Krishnamal Jagannathan and Jagannathan's work. But even those of us who know Krishnamal personally have not heard much about Kaitan. We visit the memorial of Jagannathan, but right next to Jagannathan's memorial there is a memorial stone for Kaitan, and Jagannathan and Kaitan had built the constructive workers' home with their own hands, bringing rocks from the mountain nearby. How did you, and they were all very staunch followers of Vinoba. Even now Krishnamal talks about Vinoba every 5 minutes. So that's where I saw the connection. But how did you stumble upon Kaitan? About whom even people in the Gandhian circles or in the literary circles in Tamil Nadu have hardly heard about.
So, I'll answer your first question briefly, Kannan. Broadly, I retain my opinion of Vinoba. He was a person of great personal courage, a great spiritual knowledge, but I think he did not understand how to take the constructive work aspect of Gandhi forward. I think Gandhi would have had a different approach. I think even Vinoba's contemporaries like J.C. Kumarappa and Meeraben were very critical of some aspects of his Bhutan movement. I still wonder why, though he lived 30 years after independence, he never took up a campaign for Hindu-Muslim harmony or abolition of untouchability, which were two of Gandhi's dearest. So, on Vinoba, I broadly retain my opinion. Kaitan, I'd like to talk a little bit about Kaitan, because Kaitan is an American who features in my book, Rebels Against the Raj. And he also, by the way, was critical of Vinoba towards the end. And in my book, I quote some of it. But he was a fascinating character, a missionary who comes to Madurai. He's really a figure in modern Tamil history, which is why I'm happy to be speaking about him here. So he's a missionary. He comes to Madurai during the time of the Salt March. He's inspired by Gandhi, starts wearing khaddar, and the American missionaries who are close to the Raj throw him out. Then he comes back again, and then leaves the church, but does works in Bangalore among Dalit workers. And then in the Quit India movement, he's again sent back to America. Then he comes after 47, Rajaji invites him back. And then he works, in Gandhigram. He helps set up Gandhigram, as you mentioned. He inspires Krishnamal and Sankarajigam Jagannathan. And then he settles in that rain shadow area between Dindigal and Coimbatore, not far from here, near Udan Chatram, where they established a hospital and where he is buried. Now, he is a very interesting and unusual man, and I was alerted to him, since you asked how I found out about him. I don't know where, I found out a little bit about him here and there, but the person who really got me interested in Kaitan was the son of the Jagannathans, Bhumi Jagannathan, who is a psychiatrist in Cambodia and grew up with, in Gandhigram and in a kind of very austere Gandhian home, inspired by Kaitan, whom I think he may even have called Appa. And he sent me his childhood memories of Kaitan, and that got me interested. Then I went to Udan Chatram, where again I should thank, these are two Tamil doctors who helped me in my research on Kaitan. One is Bhumi Jagannathan. The other is Dr. Vinu Aram, who runs an ashram outside Coimbatore. I think it's called Shanti Ashram. Yeah. And she, said you must go. She arranged for me to go to the Christian Fellowship Hospital in Udan Chatram, where they took me. There was a couple who had worked with Kaitan, who took me to the room where Kaitan was. And his papers were just there, and they allowed me to take it. And from that I was able to reconstruct the story. So it's in a sense, it was really Bhumi and Vinu, two children from Gandhian backgrounds, two doctors from Gandhian backgrounds, who helped me reconstruct the story of Kaitan. And it's quite a remarkable story. So because, for example, one of the things that Vinoba never did, well, things are a grudge, you can say, a whole of Vinoba, is he never organized a satyagraha against the independent Indian government on bad things they did. He only corrected land. But Kaitan and the Jagannathans organized satyagrahas against the Tamil Nadu government, and they went to jail. They went to jail in the 60s on the question of temple land in Madurai, which sharecroppers were being ill-treated. So they are obviously a quite remarkable couple, and I'm grateful particularly to Bhumi for telling me about Kaitan. And it's a very, and by the way, Kaitan also made in his last writings, because he was an American, and in 1959, Martin Luther King, when he came to India, went to Gandhigram, and Kaitan made some very interesting comparisons between race and caste, untouchability and slavery, So he was really a global kind of fighter for against injustice in that kind of sense.
Sir, இந்திய வரலாற்று ஆசிரியர்களை பொறுத்தவரையில்
Translate for you.
டிடி கோசாம்பி தொடங்கி அஜீஷ் நந்தி வரையில் இல்லைன்னா இடையில டிஆர் நாகராஜ் இப்படி இவங்க எல்லாத்துக்குமே குஹா உட்பட வந்து மார்க்சியம் இல்லைன்னா ஃப்ராங்க்ஃபர்ட் மார்க்சியம் தான் பேஸ்ன்னு ஒரு இம்ப்ரெஷன் இருக்கு. அதை பற்றி சார் என்ன நினைக்கிறாரு? அப்படி இருக்குன்னா அதுக்கு வெளியே இருக்கக்கூடிய ஹிஸ்டாரியன்ஸ், ரேர் எக்ஸாம்பிள் தரம்பால், இது மாதிரியான வேற ஹிஸ்டாரியன்ஸ் சாருக்கு தெரிஞ்ச நேம்ஸ் இருந்தால் சொல்லுங்க.
So he is asking that right from D.D. Kosambi to the Ashish Nandi, including yourself, there is a perception that the historical viewpoint is received from the Marxian view, the Frankfurt Marxian view mainly. So is there, if there are like the Rampal, who is outside this perception? So are there any such historians, and what is the viewpoint of this comment which he has made, that Marxian ideology as well?
So if you study my work carefully over the last 40 years, I have been a critic of communism longer than I have been a critic of Hindutva. I mean, I don't understand how, today it's common for people to call me a Marxist, a communist, a leftist. Why would a communist write 2,000 pages on Gandhi? Why would a communist write on environmentalism, which Marxists regard as a bourgeois deviation from the class struggle? Why would a communist write on cricket, which is a pastime? So, I am not a Marxist. I have read Marx, I have assimilated something from Marx, I am virtually no knowledge of the Frankfurt School. I have read Marx, I have read Weber, I have read modern anthropology, I have read liberal scholars. I am an Indian liberal, is how I would describe myself. And Ashish Nandi is also not a Marxist. Ashish Nandi likewise is a critic of Marxism. So it's really rather odd that a wide variety of thinkers, all they have in common is that they don't like Hindutva. That's all. What is covered between D.D. Kosambi, D.R. Nagaraj, Ashish Nandi and myself, we don't like Hindus persecuting Muslims and Christians. That's all. That's what common between us. But our intellectual frameworks are very different. You mentioned Dharampal. I happen to know Dharampal personally. And I consider him a friend. And he also gave me some valuable tips in my archival research. Dharampal was a follower of Gandhi and of Miraben, who late in life embraced Hindutva. Now, what were the psychological reasons how a follower of Gandhi and Miraben could embrace Hindutva, could celebrate the demolition of Babri Masjid? I can't answer that. I mean, I have my theories, because I had affection for Dharampal, despite our disagreements. But let me tell you, history is an empirical discipline based on what you find in the archives. You cannot be a Marxist historian or a Hindutva historian. Because if you have an ideology, it's like what I said about intellectuals being independent. Historians must be free of ideology. They must be driven by what they find in the archives. It will confound you what you find in the archives. If you are a Marxist historian, you always, if you say I'm a Marxist historian, you want to read your sources in such a way as to show Muslims are bad and Hindus are good. If you are a Marxist historian, you want to read your sources in such a way to say capitalists are bad and workers are good. History is much more complex than that. So, in that sense, Dharampal, he called himself an Indic historian, but he only worked with Indian sources. Unlike D.R. Nagaraj, who knew Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, etc. Right. So, Dharampal was an interesting man, but no one would consider him a serious historian. I can say that as someone who had personal respect for Dharampal.
I have a two-part question. One is just to zoom back a little bit about what's happening worldwide. So we see this pressure on democracy happening not just in India, like across US, southern US and Europe, Israel, etc. One side we see people are developing, technology is developing, education is improving, healthcare is improving, the quality of life is improving. But then we see in the other side where there's more lean towards a conservative mindset and people getting locked into their ideologies, etc. So how do you see this contrast? Like one side everything is evolving and one side like we're locking ourselves up. That's one. The second question is a follow-up to your earlier answer. If in the current climate someone is trying to be an independent thinker or an intellectual, right? So they get all this labeling being done, saying that no, you are a Marxist or a Hindutvaite or whatever it is, right? So how do you deal with that in your approach? Like, do you try to address them, or do you think like these things are just part and parcel of being in a public discourse? Thank you.
So Karthik, your first question I'm not competent to answer because I don't understand technology. A question was asked about fiction. There's some topics, themes I don't understand or very poorly understand, and I've not made a serious study of. So in my columns you will never find any discussion of technology or economics or film. These are all important subjects, but I understand politics, society, culture, so I can't answer your first question. Your second question, this labeling is inevitable. I often get told as much by the Congress supporters because I'm a critic of Rahul Gandhi. I think you have to be, I'm very fortunate in that I've had many remarkable exemplars who are independent. D.R. Nagaraj was mentioned. Okay. D.R. Nagaraj was a close friend of mine. He was a great bilingual Kannada English intellectual who died sadly when he was 45. And he actually was having coffee with him the evening before he died, and he's still somewhere inside me, inspiring me and telling me to be straight and honest. And I've known many remarkable people like that, and I think that has always kept me going. I think that's the example of many remarkable men, women, not just Indians but also people from outside. So I think that. So I don't really worry about being labelled, but it's important to engage. My email is in the public domain. Kannan mentioned, I reply to every email. Often I learn things from them, and I often learn interesting things from them. And I used to get a lot of mail from Hindutva people. That has stopped because because now you have Twitter and the abuse has shifted online. And I don't really look at it because my email is the public domain. If anyone has a criticism, they can write to me, I can reply. And on Gandhi, for example, I mean, since Gandhi is mentioned and Sunil is a Gandhi scholar, I had a really interesting exchange with a Kannada Gandhi scholar called D.S. Nagabhushana, who complained, like Kannan has reason, I mean, he admires Vinoba, so he has reason to think I am not being fair to Vinoba. D.S. Nagabhushana was a Lohiite, and he felt I had not been fair to Lohia. And he emailed me, and we had an email over 6 months exchange. And there were 25 pages he then put up in a private exchange. He put up on his website, and I didn't mind. He said, I'm grateful that he at least replied to me, right? So I think often you must have that, I'm happy to converse with anyone and keep it going. If the conversation becomes too abusive, I stop. If it's not, and you often learn from all kinds of people, young people, old people, all parts of India. I mean, and I'm grateful for that engagement. But I'm anchored in my independence by the memories of people I've known and admired, who are far more courageous and independent than me. I mean, I don't want to name them. Some of them are still living, and they are living in different parts of India. And I've been very lucky in knowing writers and activists of different generations, different religions, different castes, different philosophical temperaments, who have practiced that kind of independence, and who, in a sense, that way, I take nourishment from them.
Hello, sir. I have two questions. One is that in a country like India, where history is something that is very often rewritten or reconstructed, for example, like Orientalist history writing or subaltern history writing or like Hindutva history writing, what is the role of a historian and how important is his role as someone who should be unbiased in his political ideology?
That's a good question, but it's like any other writer. It's not any more important or less important than a political commentator or a poet or a fiction writer. It's a calling, it's a vocation, it's a craft. You have to work hard at it. You have to learn to improve your methods, your style. But I don't, I don't think. I mean, I put it this way, that I'm just a communicator, a witness, a documenter. I am not a change maker. I have no pretensions that I'm going to change society. I'm trying to present a portrait of how I think things really happened in all its diversity and its nuance, so that you can read it and maybe learn a little bit from it about the past. But the people who, in terms of importance to society, historians are magnificently unimportant. Doctors and teachers are important, right? But it's what I can do. I can't be a doctor, I can't be a teacher. I wish I was a musician, but I can't be a musician. Okay. So, but to do, it's like any other craft. Do it sincerely, honestly, wholeheartedly, and without regard for, personal advancement. Don't write a book because you think it'll make you $1 million or because it'll get you a Syed Academy Award. Write a book because you think it's a literary or an intellectual challenge. That's how I see it.
முக்கியமான ஒரு விஷயமா இருக்கும் அப்படின்னு சொன்னார். ஸோ தேங்க்யூ சார். இட்ஸ் அ ப்ளஷர் ஹேவிங் யூ. ஹோப் யூ ஹேட் அ நைஸ் டிஸ்கஷன். தேங்க்யூ சார்.
ஒரு நீண்ட உரையாடலுக்கு நன்றி. தேங்க்யூ ஸோ மச் சார் ஃபார் பீயிங் ஹியர்.